Good afternoon. I'm Bronwyn Turner and I'm going to talk to you today about corporate governance frameworks as applicable to Mineral Resources Limited. First off, my outline is what is corporate governance, followed by a brief history of corporate governance for mining and the extractive and minerals and metals industry, what frameworks are suitable for mining and mining services companies, how MRL's current practice fits the frameworks, and recommendations for improvements to be made to reporting corporate governance and extending sustainable development and corporate social responsibility. So what is corporate governance? Well, there are a lot of definitions. The Australian Securities Exchange Corporate Governance Council defines it as the framework of rules, relationships, systems and processes within and by which authority is exercised and controlled within corporations. It encompasses the mechanisms by which companies and those in control are held to account. The Governance Institute of Australia describes it as governance encompassing the systems by which an organisation is controlled and operates and the mechanisms by which it and its people are held to account. Ethics, risk management, compliance and administration are all elements of governance. Corporate governance in mining often focuses on different aspects depending on which stakeholder you're talking to. Corporate social responsibility, particularly sustainable development, are often synonymous with corporate governance in literature and in community perceptions, and the research suggests that CSR is simply an extension of good corporate governance. Mining governance and sustainability has increased over the last 20 years due to the fact that when managed properly, mining creates social and economic benefits and decreases negative environmental and social impacts. So minerals and metals are considered essential for modern life, but there are positive and negative impacts. For example, community discontent has led to the shutdown of operations and moratoriums on mining, particularly commodities in some locations, such as in Australia for uranium in certain states. In the 2011-12 financial year, mining contributed 9.6% of GDP, 48.5% of total exports and 41.6% of total industry investment. In 1987, the Brundtland Report was released by the UN Royal Commission on Environment and Development, and it argued that the current economic growth model was unsustainable and proposed ways in which the needs and aspirations of the current generation could be met without compromising future generations. In 1992, many world governments met in Rio de Janeiro and signed agreements that established goals and eventually guidelines for sustainable development globally, and they coined the term responsible mining. In that same year, the Cadbury Report was released in the UK. This was one of the first reports to create a code of practice for corporate governance for listed companies, and they were expected to follow those codes. In 1998, 9 of the largest mining companies in the world collaborated to create the Global Mining Initiative. This was an attempt to change the way the mining industry approached problems in terms of governance and sustainability. They commissioned a study that resulted in the Mining, Minerals and Sustainable Development Project, which outlined broad goals for reporting and governance with a mining industry focus. The International Council of Mining and Metals was formed from that in 2003, and they created 10 principles which provide a framework to support corporate governance and sustainable development in the mining sector. And they were largely based on the issues that the Mining, Minerals and Sustainable Development Project found. The Minerals Council of Australia largely endorsed and adopted the ICMM principles with some minor changes in terminology and just making them relevant to Australia. They are called the enduring values. In 2003, the Australian Stock Exchange outlined the corporate governance guidelines for listed entities for the first time, and these were updated in 2007 and 2014 and will be further updated in 2019. In 2006, the Australian Government created a series of handbooks outlining the leading practices for various aspects of the mining cycle, so the sustainable practices in those cycles. This was collated into one good reference in 2011. In 2015, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were created, and they were adopted by the Australian Government and reported on in 2018. The ICMM and Minerals Council also updated their principles to more closely align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Alright, so suitable frameworks for mining and minerals companies include the Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Principles and Recommendations, of which there are 8 principles and 29 recommendations. It is a legal obligation for listing on the ASX to follow these or explain why they're not being followed. The Minerals Council of Australia Enduring Values are 10 values that supplement these recommendations and are specifically for the mining industry. The ICMM 10 principles are the original principles that Enduring Values was based on. The leading practice, sustainable development in mining, is an Australian government created practice, and it is a practice for every stage of mine life. So there's one for exploration, there's one for development, there's one for construction, operation, and closure. So the MRL's current practice is that it mostly complies with the ASX corporate governance principles and recommendations, with a few exceptions. These are all reported in Mineral Resources governance statements. Recommendation number 2.5, the chair is not an independent director, but they do have a lead independent director, so technically it still fits, although it's not ideal. Number 4.1, although the current membership consists of all non-executive directors, the Audit Committee Charter says only a majority need to be non-executive when the recommendation is that all of them must be non-executive directors. Number 7.1, there is no specific board committee for risk management, as the chairman has delegated responsibility for this to the senior executive with board oversight. Recommendation 7.3, there's no internal audit function in the company, but we do have a procedure called risk management, internal compliance and control, which executives and all other employees must follow. The CSR practices that MRL currently has on occupational health and safety. So there's many of these, including the Mine Safety Inspection Act, the Mine Safety Inspection Regulations, various safety codes of practices and codes of conduct within safety, including dangerous goods, electrical safety, and many, many others. There's also a lot of environmental law, and that all is about disturbance and various other pieces of legislation, both national and state. As a consequence, MRL has developed an environmental management system. Other environmental things are we are a founding member of a group of mining companies and academic institutions who have implemented an industrial transformation training centre on mine site restoration. The aim of this is to provide rehabilitation outcomes that are more suitable for each particular mine site. We're also a member of the Pilbara Rehabilitation Group to share information about how rehabilitation works in that environment. It's a very different environment from the rest of the state. We also have an environmental leadership program to promote the importance of effective environmental management and sustainability, and that's for all employees. Indigenous engagement is not only through conducting heritage surveys, which are mandatory, but also through training and engagement and employment. There's a training program called Looking Forward, and that is to train and provide work experience for Indigenous people in order to get them through to potentially full-time work within the industry. And it has been quite successful. There's several who've been employed within MRL and also throughout the mining industry. There are also some modest gender diversity targets that have been set recently. And for the community, a lot of the support is in the case of health and education initiatives, such as supporting clubs, schools, sponsorships of disadvantaged youth with the intention of them going to university, also regional community programs and schools within the areas that we operate. The recommendations are that MRL is doing quite well. on corporate governance reporting. There are a few areas which may need attention in the future, especially as a company grows. Updating the Audit Committee Charter is a really simple one. To comply with current practice and the ASX recommendations, it just needs pretty much a change of 1 or 2 words. Also, it would be recommended to set up a formal internal audit function. As the business expands, particularly if it ends up going interstate, there may be risks that are not foreseen because the people are working from the Perth office, and the board may not be all over all of the risks associated with working in different places. Also consider removing reporting closer to the ICMM principles or the Minerals Council enduring values, even though we're not a member. Maybe consult with the Council of Superannuation Investors to determine whether they believe the reporting can be approved. They found that 83 cents of every dollar invested in the ASX 200 last year was in the companies with detailed or leading reporting standards, and they all incorporate governance and sustainability measures. MRL does have measurable targets on some sustainability measures, such as safety and gender diversity, but there is scope to increase the number of measurable targets in areas such as climate. The Australian Sustainable Development Goals and the Leading Practice Handbooks also provide guidance for other improvement areas that the company could make. These could be implemented over time. Governments and industry bodies are providing increasing levels of support and guidance on sustainability and governance specifically for the mining industry, both nationally and internationally, because it's been shown that better stewardship will increase the longevity of an economically viable mining industry. Sustainability and good corporate governance go hand in hand, and they increase trust in all stakeholders, which maintains or improves MRL's social licence to operate and has the potential to increase our asset values. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?